behalf of Kachi to present to you our relay live stream. And Kachi is basically a student-led nonprofit organization with student leaders from over 27, I think, international schools, ranging from Canada, China, South Korea, Singapore, and the US. And our 24-hour relay live stream aims to discover what it means to be Korean in today's society and international stage. And over the 24 hours, students will discuss what identity basically means to us. And for me personally, I will be taking you through 5 different items that have personal significance to me and to my identity as not only a Korean American, but also within my school society and just my, sorry, someone came in, just my life in general. So this is kind of embarrassing, and I actually cannot believe I'm going to be showing this to a lot of people, but this is basically a drawing I drew in kindergarten. That's supposed to be me. And apart from my very questionable artistic skills as a kindergartner, you can see that I drew myself with blonde hair, and that was not a coincidence. There's another one that I drew in 2nd grade. This one's slightly better, only she has red hair this time. And obviously, I, as an Asian American, do not have those Eurocentric qualities about me. This actually speaks a lot to how I felt very split growing up, because unlike a lot of people and a lot of my friends who are also born in the US and who also have a dual citizenship, I actually only spent 3 months in America. I did not spend an entire lifetime there. I did not spend even a couple years of my life there. All I really did was I was born and I came to Korea. And this really, my parents like to say that when given a choice, I chose English over Korean. And when they say this, their primary use of this meaning is that I chose the language English to be my primary language and to be my mother tongue over Korean. But I feel like that statement encapsulates so much more than just language. For me, when I was given the choice between the identity of being an American or being an Asian, or the dual identity of being an Asian American, when I was younger, I latched on to the American side of myself, and that was my primary approach to life. And so the 3 months I spent on American soil was really what I viewed myself as, and I really have no testament as to why exactly I might have done that. But this created a lot of alienation. The school that I attended, despite it being branded as international, it was very centered in Korea, and I was very aware of the reputation I was getting throughout my life there as, the whitewashed Asian, the one who couldn't speak Korean. I could speak Korean, but I was very bad at it. And so the one who had no interest in kind of developing those linguistic skills, I guess. And it was a lonely time. And I honestly have to take a lot of responsibility for that, because I did not take myself accountable to kind of connect with my Korean roots. I did not take myself accountable to connect with the Asian American part of myself. And there was a small shift when I switched schools to attend the current school that I am attending right now. And this school is, in my subjective terms, I have to say that it is a lot more diverse in terms of student body and interest. And so that gave me a lot of freedom to explore the part of my identity I had always felt like I should be suppressing. But it didn't bring me any closer to the Korean side of myself. It just let me explore the side of myself that I had always felt like I was being judged for in a non-judgmental and free environment. So this kind of continued until, I will show this photo very briefly because just for privacy reasons. I don't think I'm gonna dwell on it for too much, but this is like a photo of my grandfather, and he unfortunately passed away before I was born, so I never got to meet him. I never got to engage with him, which is pretty sad. But as I was growing up, my father began to tell me more and more stories about my grandfather and how he was a general in the Korean War and how he was very respected in his area. He was very respected as a person, as someone in the military service. And just hearing these stories about my grandfather really connected me to Korean history, first of all, because everyone knows about the Korean War, but as the quote, whitewashed Asian, I never really had much interest in exploring that part of myself a little more. But to kind of learn that I had a family connection to that side of Korea really cemented the thought that I should be taking more initiative to, bridge the two sides of myself together. And so this really showed a lot more personal growth from the previous object of myself with blonde hair, because I was at last, recognizing myself to be the Asian American that I was born to be. My parents deliberately went to America to give birth to me, and it is a gift that I will forever treasure. I'm forever thankful for them for doing so. But it did cause a lot of split. Um, it caused a significant lack of self awareness in the first primary years of my life. And so, hearing these stories and being connected to a part of Korean history really did help me to show more growth, personally in character and personally in self exploration as I kind of move forward and I started to take an active interest in what was going on in my life. Um, okay, this next object I think I'm going to spend a little bit more time on, but this kind of transitioned into a period of life where I became very interested in North Korea. And that sounds kind of odd to just say, straight away like that, but I basically joined a club in freshman year that was dedicated to helping North Korean refugees through service such as fundraisers or helping out at a food kitchen or just, making snacks for them, delivering it to them, delivering it to their organizations or their shelters or whatever. But the club very soon fell apart because there was a lack of engagement from the general student body. And so after leaving that club, I got a recommendation from a friend to join another North Korean defector club, which was part of a larger nonprofit organization. And that very soon became a passion for me because growing up, listening to all these stories about my grandfather and what he did to help South Korea, it's inevitable that there was a divide in my heart between South Korea and North Korea simply because of the reputation and the history that our two sides of the peninsula have against each other. But something that really caught my eye in the North Korean defector program was the fact that they offered volunteers to teach North Koreans English. And this is something I actually had a little bit of confidence in because, once again, while growing up, I was very much known as the literature girl. I was very much known to be the English oriented, more American side within the grade. And so finally, here I was given a chance to kind of turn something that I hadn't been super proud of into something that I could be proud of and that I could use to kind of work to create a better change. So, just to kind of give a little bit more background, the organization that I joined, and it would be great if any of you guys could look into it too. It's a great program. It's originally called Teach North Korean Refugees, TNKR, but we have a separate name called Freedom Speakers International. And so this is basically a certificate of appreciation, just basically kind of proof of everyone's participation in the program. So TNKR became really integral in my life, not only because of the opportunity it presented to teach English, but also because of the opportunity it presented to connect with other North Korean defectors. Working with North Korean defectors really helped me to reflect on the idea of what being Korean entails and kind of reconcile the past with the present. Because a lot of the defectors that I had, I could, in a way, see myself through them, and I can in no way relate to their history or their trauma or the generational and cultural gap that's between us. But a lot of what they talked about to me was how, even though they physically looked Korean and even though they ethnically were Korean, they could never be one with South Korean society because of the cultural gap that separated them. And for me, when I was younger, and for me to have taken that deliberate choice to kind of isolate that Korean part of myself, it really helped me reflect on, the concept of what does being Korean really entail? Like, do you have to be ethnically Korean to kind of um encapsulate that Korean part of culture? Or do you have to just simply love your country with all your heart? Do you just have to work to create the best impact you can in society? Like there were so many questions that were coming into my head at the time, and it really TNKR really helped me to kind of open up a part of myself that I never really had experienced before. And it was then that I started to take more of an active interest in expanding my personal Korean, like the use of the language Korean. I am much more fluent in it now than I was when I was younger. My old school friends would be glad to hear that because I was pretty terrible. I started engaging more in everyday discussions with my parents about Korean current events or recent news that happened. I asked all of my friends about music suggestions, pop suggestions, culture, drama. Like I started watching a lot more K dramas with them, and it wasn't because I wanted to create a separate part of myself that had never really been released before. It was mainly I just made a board. It was mainly because I realized that I could never be at peace with myself if two parts of myself were constantly conflicting. And that's how I lived my entire life. So, sorry, I just need some water. That's basically how I had lived my entire life, and it was a good moment of reflection. Um, Something that a lot of people, when asked about me, when they say, "Oh yeah, who's Rachel?" they'll say like literature because I'm really into English. But another thing that they'll say is theater because I'm a theater kid, and I have been since second grade. And there's a lot of good and there's a lot of bad that comes with being a theater kid. But a lot of the bad was the inevitable competition that comes along with theater. And so, even though people categorize me as a theater kid, I never really felt like one. I never could reconcile that part of myself because of the incredible foundation of talent that all my peers at school brought, because of the incredible foundation of talent that they brought on stage and off stage. People said that I was a theater kid, but as someone who was constantly getting ensemble roles, or as someone who was always, you know, at like the back corner of the choreography or just whatever it was that was going on in the moment, I never really considered myself to be, I never really considered my identity to be a theater kid. But then that pretty much changed last year when I was cast in Shakespeare's The Tempest, and that was our school's fall play of the year. And it was a really big change because we were in the midst of COVID. We had no idea if we could actually perform. We had no idea how it was going to happen. So what we basically did was we had we had an audience of a total 100 people, and we socially distanced them out, and we performed wearing masks. And that was really terrible in the beginning, but the drama department actually customized masks for us. So this was my mask. Um, I played Miranda, a very sweet and innocent girl who spent her entire life secluded on a rock. Um, and so this was basically the mask that I wore. And like, what's not to say, it's beautiful. Like the people who created it did an excellent job. But the Tempest soon proved to be a personal connection, not just to the theater part of myself, because for the first time in my life, I had gotten kind of a role that I could speak to the general student body to. It was the first time I had gotten a principal character. And while I agree with the fact that there are no small roles, it's what you bring to the character that adds depth to it. Um, it's always good to kind of have that general name around surrounding the role. So that was the first time I actually felt more validated as a theater kid, and there's a lot more to unpack in that as to if that's really necessary or not, but that's what happened inevitably. And so not only did it bring me together as a theater kid, but the Shakespeare production that we did was actually an extremely Koreanized. That's not a good way to put it, but I can't think of any other way to put it. Basically, what we did was we took the Tempest and we set it in this remote island in Korea, and we incorporated as much Korean culture as we could. Like all the costumes that we were hanbok based. I had this beautiful pink hanbok that a lot of like young girls wear. A lot of the music that we did in between transitions and the scenes were traditional Korean music. One of our I think she's I forgot her actual position, but I think she's manager of set design. She got the traditional Korean drums and she was playing it, as set changes were happening, as like things were developing. We also included a lot of Korean customs. For example, my character got a love interest. My character got married on stage, and it was a fun time for me. But I think what was really interesting was that we transformed the wedding to be a traditional Korean wedding. So what we did was, we would have all these people bring us gifts. They would present it, and yeah, I had never really known Korean weddings to be like that, but it was interesting because I saw photos of my parents' wedding when they actually went through that, and to actually experience it on stage was a whole different story. Um, okay, I'm just gonna check questions real quick. Sorry, there was a lot of technical issues managing two different accounts. The question that I think I'm getting is, do you still feel that conflict, and if so, how are you managing it? Yeah, so really, I've really come to peace with the idea that there's always going to be conflict. There really is no other way to navigate life without conflict. And although conflict aversion is important, I feel like confronting that conflict face on is so integral in making your way through life. And I have just come to a place where I can say, yeah, I had that conflict. Sometimes I still do, but that's who I am. I am a conflicted person. I'm conflicted between this and that. And even though I would love to reconcile those two together, I have taken steps to do so, and I will take steps to do so. So oh yeah, and also dual citizens or people of color or people of mixed blood, this is not a concept that's alien or that's foreign to them in any way, shape or form. And so I feel like it's really important for everyone to kind of reach out to each other and to, understand that we share this part of identity, across worlds. We might not be able to directly relate to each other, but we have this one thing that's keeping us connected, and that's so important to recognize. I also, if there were any previous questions that I just couldn't find because I'm not a techie, please just resend them because yeah, they're not popping up. Um, yeah, so apart from being a theater kid, as I already mentioned, I'm also a student. As my DP literature teacher would say, I am a student of literature. And oh god, that phrase itself gives me like flashbacks. That's not important. Um, Something I realized about myself is I don't take history at school simply because of school rules, limitations, and the way that you're only allowed to take a certain number of classes. And my interests just kind of lie more primarily elsewhere. But when growing up, learning about my grandfather, I learned that Korean history is actually what connects me a lot to Korea, the peninsula. So last year we had to read this book called Human Acts, and it's by Hanga. And I have another one of her books here. It's called The White Book, or like Him in Korean. And I don't know where it is. But she's an amazing, amazing author. And I highly, highly recommend that every single one of you check this book out. But basically, last year during literature class, we talked a lot about literary criticism. And two of the literary criticism we went into was historical criticism and psychological criticism. And this book kind of brought the two subsets of criticism together. We explored into Korean history. This book is primarily about the Gwangju uprising, a very violent and sad part of our history that happened in Gwangju a couple of years ago. I think there's a movie about it too. If you want to check it out, it's very emotional. The book is very emotional too. But basically, nothing you read in school you're gonna enjoy. Or that might just be me. Well, rarely anything you read in school you're going to enjoy. But this book was one of the rare things that I enjoyed in junior year. And I am just so thankful for that because I would not have been able to get through junior year without this book. This was the first time I read a book centered on a moment in Korean history. And that sounds so bad. And I know it does, but that's the truth. Like I said, conflict aversion is still ongoing, but that's the truth. And learning about the Gwangju uprising, it really, even though I don't have any direct connections to that uprising, even though I don't have a family connection or relationship connection, or even just like an interest connection, because I've never been to Gwangju, I just felt so connected to each of the characters in such a way that it opened my eyes to the long history of our society. History as a subject doesn't interest me. History as a concept interests me because it's amazing how generation upon generation just builds on each other, and it's amazing how the experiences of one generation just lead on to another. Like our society as it is today is built on the society of previous generations, and their impact is still felt as we live, and our impact is going to be felt as our future, the generations that we bring on is going to live. That's a very bad way to put it. I'm really sorry. But, sorry, I'm blanking out right now. That's the best way I could put it into words. But I found out that literature is another way that I connect really to my passions, and I really connect to different parts of my identity. We had a question last class about what makes literature meaningful, and my response to that was literature is meaningful when someone has something to say and that's worth hearing. We all have different perspectives, we all have different opinions, but some opinions are going to conflict with ours, and some opinions people are going to consider inferior or superior to others depending on where you as a person lie on the spectrum of perspective. But I feel like it's so important to hear everyone's words. Yeah. So yeah, of course. It's called Human Acts, and it's by Hanggang, and there's a Korean version of it if you guys feel more comfortable in that. This is the American version. Let me just give a quick summary. There's like a total of four different characters, I think, and they all center around when this young boy named Dongho is killed in the Gwangju uprising, and we actually see through the perspective of every single one of these characters. We see through the perspective of Dongho before he was killed. We see through the perspective of Dongho's best friend who was killed before him. We see through the perspective of an editor who's trying to kind of rise through censorship in the media to kind of report on the killings and the military uprising that's been occurring. And so this book just takes you on an emotional journey. It takes you on this worldwide of various different forms. And I started crying in the middle of class, and that's really embarrassing. I don't think anyone in my class knew because it was very quiet. I was like in the back and I was like sniffling over the book. But for me, because Human Acts was an assigned book, it was an assigned assignment for us to read. That wasn't the big momentum in my life. The big momentum happened afterwards when I went to the library and I bought the white book. This is once again gonna sound so bad. As you can see behind me, I have so many books, and I think 99.99999% of them is just Western books. Like Western authors, Western Eurocentric beliefs, Western themes. I think Hanggang might be the first Korean author to kind of set foot in my library. So that's kind of bad. But it's progress, and I will take it. So, yeah, so I feel like overall, as of now, I feel a lot more connected to the Korean side of myself, and I don't know if this is just, the grass always looks greener on the other side kind of trope that's occurring in life, but I will be going off to college next year, and just kind of imagining myself living in America, that's all I ever wanted to do when I was young. When I was younger, my favorite part of life was summer vacation because I would go to America and I would visit my aunt and uncle and cousin who lives there, obviously. Um, and I liked it not just because I got to reconnect with family, but because I got to be in America. I got to be the little blonde girl that I always wanted to be. And next year, I'm going to be living there for 4 years of my life, and who knows what's going to happen after that. And I'm sure a lot of current seniors can relate to that right now. But now that that's kind of upon me, I find myself clinging to Korea a lot more than I used to do. Like every day, I'll go up to my mom and I'll be like, "Mom, you have to teach me how to keep kimchi fresh throughout the 4 years. You have to teach me how to put together Korean barbecue. That's my favorite. That's my favorite food. You have to teach me how to make keranjin." Like, there's so many ways that I'm kind of scrabbling to latch onto the Korean part of myself, and for me personally, I find it very saddening that I'm doing that right at the cusp of leaving. Does that make sense? Should I paraphrase it? I find it sad that I'm kind of grabbing onto the Korean parts of my identity more desperately now that it's about to be taken from me in terms of a physical sense, in terms of physical distance, and in terms of like immersion. And I feel like a lot of that really comes from current day issues, with the pandemic and being at home for so long. I kind of, okay, first few days of the pandemic, I was going insane. As I'm an only child, and I think my mom's watching actually, and I love you, mom and dad. I love you so much, but being locked up with no one but your parents all day for so long can be so incredibly frustrating. But that's really what forced the face-to-face interactions. That's really what forced me to use my parents can't speak English. That's really what forced me to use Korean in everyday life. That's really what took me to kind of look around myself and say, hey, I can't remove myself from this situation. Let me face the situation that I'm in right now, which is South Korea. I live here. This is my home. I've been here my entire life. So that's one way the pandemic actually brought good into my life. It really forced me to kind of take a good hard look at my immediate surroundings and appreciate it a lot more. Another way that I'm currently trying to connect more is through social media. A couple of months, maybe like 2 months ago, I had a complete freak meltdown and I deleted every single one of my social media platforms. And that was because I just felt really overwhelmed with all the anti Asian hate that was going on, like, and everything that was being reported in the media. And I kind of thought back to how when I was younger, I saw myself blonde haired, blue eyed, as one with America. And I was like, I realized that I could see myself that way, but other people won't. And so, not only was I incredibly scared for my family in America, but I was also incredibly scared for the way I was going to be perceived moving forward, in college and university, for all my friends who are currently there. Um, it was really revealing to me because when I first saw news coverage of that, that's when I realized that I hadn't completely disconnected from my Eurocentric tendencies. I hadn't completely disconnected from the idea that the Western part of myself should be prioritized from the Eastern part of myself. And so a lot of that shock kind of forced me to take time off of social media, which was a really, really good thing. It cost me. I'm just gonna do a little PSA. Guys, get off social media as much as you can. It's great for like interaction, but it's not great for you in the long term. Okay, back to the story. So yeah, it caused me to go off of social media, and it caused me to have some more first-handed face-to-face interaction with my life. So I think one thing that I really, really try to do is turn the negative into the positive whenever I can, My friends will describe me as a very pessimistic person. A close friend of mine in recent days has called me a nihilist, and I'm pretty sure he was joking, but it's true that I can be pessimistic, and that is a part of my identity that other people will say that I have. But just to be more, you know, again, conflict. Oh God, the word completely just zooped out of my head. Zoop's not even a word. Just to face conflict, you know, the inner conflict, internalized conflict versus externalized conflict, just to kind of come face to face with that. It really is important for me to practice kind of more positive psychology and to turn the bad into the good. And so, you know, pandemic helped me reconnect. News coverage of negative things going on in the world helped me to realize I should appreciate my culture. If other people are appropriating my culture doesn't need me to do it as well. Like, I don't need to turn on my own culture. I, if people, it's really hard being proud. I feel like, especially for our generation and at our age, it's really hard to be kind of proud of who you are. You know, we just have so much going on in our lives, and that's completely normal. But especially as, you know, just speaking to my fellow Asian Americans out there, especially as an Asian American in current day society with all the racial tension and all the divisions that's going on, I feel like it's much more important than ever to be aware of our cultural origins and to be aware of the way that we view ourselves. Because if we don't respect ourselves, who's gonna? You know? We can't just rely on everyone else. I feel like we really have to recognize our self-importance, and we do have to recognize the beauty of our media, of our culture, and the contribution that we can bring to the world instead of constantly turning away from it as I have. So, wow, that was a lot of honesty in like the past 40 minutes? 30? Yeah, there's approximately like 7-ish minutes left. I don't have much more to say. So if you guys have any like questions or anything, I would just love to answer them. If you want to hear more about anything specific that I talked about here, you know, like hear more about a specific object or like a specific way of connecting, that's fine too. But oh yeah, disclaimer. You probably have noticed throughout this entire life that my voice is cracking a lot. I have a like a couple of years ago I discovered that there was something kind of iffy about like my sinus area that's like connected to my vocal cords that makes it really hard for me to maintain vocal health, which is really difficult because I personally, another integral part of my identity is being a singer. I take classical training, and so keeping a vocal condition is very important for me. But whenever it gets around like 10, 11ish p.m., my voice starts to give way, which is why I sound a little iffy here and I keep drinking water, but there it is. So another important part of my identity comes from being a singer. And the funny thing is, a lot of people who know me, someone someone very recent and someone who's watching this right now has called me very outspoken and very just self-assertive. And you know, this he didn't say this in like a bad way, but that kind of surprised me a little because that's not how I view myself at all. I'm very introverted when you first meet me. I have a lot of anxiety around public speaking, which is why I keep messing up, stumbling over my words here and there. You know, you can see it right now. But it's kind of interesting to see how the way that you view yourself might not necessarily be the way that others view you. And that's another important thing I think to keep in mind. You know, the way that self perception is so important, and it self perception comes out a lot in the way that you present yourself. And while growing up, I was very very aware of what other people were saying about me. I was very insecure of whether or not people were talking about me behind my back, or the reputation that I had throughout the school, which again, in my old school, was not the best because of my Eurocentric tendencies. But again, taking a negative into a positive, I think you can either choose to let this get you down, or you can either choose to let this build you up. No shade to my old school at all. I absolutely adore my friends there. I still keep in contact with a lot of them, but it really did make me stronger in a way, and it really did make me more self-aware. Like, I remember this one time a new girl came to school, and she went home and she said the first thing that came out of her mouth was, "Oh yeah, the school's really good." The second thing that came out of her mouth was, "I met this girl named Rachel. She's the only one at school who doesn't speak Korean." And I was like, when I heard that, I was like, "Oh God, that's not good." So I mean, she didn't mean it in a bad way. Obviously, it's not a bad thing to say about someone. It was just kind of embarrassing to kind of have that reputation even around like a new student. But you know, it can be taken as constructive criticism. I was very separated from Korea. I was very separated from Korean, and just a couple of months ago, I received an opportunity to kind of work in a very credited organization, but I declined because I was scared. And the reason why I was scared was because the primary use was Korean. And people say, I mean, now that I'm looking back on it, I have a lot of regrets about not taking up that opportunity. It really was a great opportunity, not just in name, but in terms of building character, because it was centered a lot. It was focused a lot in leadership. It was focused a lot in. I just feel like it would have helped me grow as a person a lot more. And the main issues that they were tackling were societal issues in Korea. So I feel like as a person, it would have really helped me to develop, but I turned it down because my fear of confronting a part of myself that I wasn't really fully confident in was just so overwhelming. And so, that's an example of how, even though I have come to a point of peace and how I have come to a point of somewhat self recognition of what is happening in the world and in my immediate world, there's setbacks. Someone said, when you're running, you trip. There's no other way to put it. When you run, you do trip. And I feel like that was a significant fall that I took. But yeah, I think the overall message that I just want to end out with is, throughout my life, there have been different stages where I realized that I need to reconnect with who I am. And I can never really know who I am if I don't find peace with the internalized conflict that I have going on. And so moving forward, I just want everyone to know that this is a universal struggle. This is not a unique struggle. It's definitely shared by so many people. And I really think that it's important to build each other up, to kind of support each other in this conflict that we do face every day. And it's important to just look after yourself and don't beat yourself up about every single tiny setback that happens, because we're all human and, things are going to happen. Yeah, so I think that brings us to the end of the session. It is 12 a.m. now, so a new day has begun. Hallelujah. Next up is Subin Lim, and everyone just stick around and please tune in to hear what Subin says about their identity. We are on for quite a couple of more hours, so just stick around, and I hope you all just stay healthy. I hope you stay happy and wear a mask, guys. Keep safe from Corona.